I'm back again to tell you all about Sleepy Drew, a family-owned small business where comfort meets style for moms and their little ones. Their adorable PJs come in 2-piece sets or zip-ups, and they're comfy, durable, and even have antibacterial qualities. These pajamas are designed by a mom with moms in mind. My listeners can even receive a 15% discount on their first order by using the code QUIETConnection, all one word, at checkout. Shop now, and when you get your jammies, post a picture on social media, tag Quiet Connection, and let us know why you love Sleepy Drew. Make bedtime the best time with Sleepy Drew. Hi, welcome to Quiet Connection, a podcast dedicated to ending the stigma around postpartum mental health. I'm Chelsea. In this week's episode, Vashti, author of Passports and Parasites, recounts her journey into parenthood, including her experiences with pregnancy, childbirth, and the fertility challenges she faced. She shares her experiences of living in different countries and the varying levels of support she received during the postpartum period. Let's hear from Vashti. Hello! Today I am here with Vashti. Vashti, how are you?
Hi, Chelsea. I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm excited to have you. I think we'll just jump right into things. Sometimes I like to sort of give my guests an intro, but you do such a better job of that than I do. So I would love it if you could sort of tell me a little bit about yourself and who you were before becoming a parent.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. Hi, everyone. I'm Vashti Haley. I'm an author, a functional medicine coach, a mom, all of those things. I have spent the last 15 years mostly residing overseas in different countries. And so I have a lot of sort of different stories to tell about my two birth stories being wildly different. And so that's a little bit about me.
Yeah. And before you were a mom?
Before I was a mom, I worked in international development. I lived in war zones. I had a very crazy adventurous life.
Yeah.
And then I became a mom and it was a crazy adventurous life in a totally different way.
That's what motherhood and parenthood will do to you.
Yes.
Yeah. But you've been all over the place, which is super exciting. I guess I'd love to know sort of your journey into parenthood. Like how did you meet your partner? How were those decisions made? Things like that.
Okay, yeah. I met my partner, now husband, in 2003, I want to say. It's been a while now. And we randomly met in New York City. He was there on business and we had mutual friends. I was also visiting the city. And we met, and it was about a year later that we, decided to get together, kind of. He was going to Iraq and I was in Seattle at the time. And so it was this very long distance thing right off the bat. And then we dated for 4 years. Well, I should say I moved to Washington, D.C. right after that to be with him. One of those decisions where you're like, oh, I'm just going to get in my car and move across the country and see what happens.
Oh, man. Yeah. Let's just do this.
Let's just do it. So I moved from Seattle to Washington, D.C. in 2005. And we dated. He did not want to have children. So I, kind of really came to terms with that. And then we got married in 2008. And he was like, we should have a baby. And I was like, wait, what? Like, we've already gone through this. So that was a whole other discussion, right?
Yeah.
Because, I had really changed my mindset around having children because I had always wanted to be a mom. It just was something, but yeah, I definitely want to be a mom. And so then I had taken that step back and thought, okay, I'm cool if it's just the two of us and we go through life together. So then we got married in 2008 and we quickly got pregnant, actually. And then I had a miscarriage. And, that was really this sort of shocking entry into a sort of American prenatal care, if you want to call it that, of there's no heartbeat. Sorry, try again in 3 months. And then you go home and I remember laying on the ground, just sort of on a futon mattress, just crying for days. You're in pain, you're miscarrying, your dreams are sort of disintegrating, and just kind of coming to terms with that. And thought, okay, well, they said wait and try again, so we'll just do that. Not really giving it, I gave it a lot of thought at the moment, but not that it wouldn't be a hard thing. I didn't know what was in front of us. And I guess that's life, right? You don't know. And in 2009, we went to Iraq. He had gotten his next job. He works for the State Department. So we're in the Foreign Service. It's the diplomatic corps for the State Department, or for the United States. And I thought, well, I'm not pregnant. I can apply for a job at the embassy there, and I can go with him. So I applied for a job at the embassy in Baghdad. And this is 2009, so we're still at war. And I went, and I dropped myself right into a world I had no understanding about, just the State Department life, living in a war zone, all of these things. My stress level was off the charts, the beginning of living with really complex stress, or chronic stress, I should say. And after that, we had that year there, and we thought, you know what, we're going to start trying to have a baby again. Not in that situation.
Right.
Clearly.
Right.
I would have been on the first plane home. There was no support for having a baby in a war zone at that time. And so our next assignment was Beirut, Lebanon. And so we moved there in 2009, and we started trying to have a baby, and quickly found out that I had no problem getting pregnant, but I had problems staying pregnant, which is a story that I know many, many people can relate to. Mm-hmm. And so, many months had kind of gone by at that point, like, okay, miscarriage, waiting. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to see a doctor here in Beirut. And it was this amazing endocrinologist, a reproductive endocrinologist that I started seeing. And he was like, you know what, we're not waiting to test you, which I can tell you right now is very different than in the United States, where they wait and they wait and they wait, and you just have miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage. And they're like, so sorry, And so he immediately tested me for MTHFR and blood clotting disorders, because he's like, the fact that you're getting pregnant and you're losing every pregnancy at like 8 weeks tells me that there's something going on here.
Right.
And sure enough, positive homozygous for MTHFR and also for latent factor 5. So I was like, we're like, okay, we have, we now know that what's kind of going on, and we can make a plan from this. And so I really credit, the healthcare system in Lebanon for really being proactive, very Western oriented for the most part in their medical practice. I mean, my doctor had gone, I think, to Harvard and somewhere else. So, he was, Western trained doctor, but he was just like, we're not waiting. And, I really think that he's the reason that we have kids now. So we were able to then have a plan in place where I was taking, blood thinners every day as soon as I had a pregnancy test, doing all of these different things. But there was this moment there where I had a miscarriage when we were in Lebanon, and it was just so awful, as all miscarriages, are. And I was away from my best friend. I'm away from my mom. But we had really tight community there. And I have to say, it was an amazing experience in the fact of like people supporting me. I was very far away from home and hurting so badly. And my husband was leaving for Syria as the war there was starting. And I was just like, wow, like one, I had this amazing support system. And then two, and I think a lot of people, and women particularly feel this, they don't have time to actually grieve and think about the loss that has occurred. Yeah. We're just expected to go on to the next thing. Mm-hmm. You might get a couple days off work, but you better not take any more than that. Or life just keeps happening, and you don't take those moments to really sit and grieve and move through that process, which then just continues to carry on with you through life. And it wasn't almost a decade later that I really realized that I had never dealt with any of this before.
Yeah.
It just
compounds.
It just compounds,
Yeah.
So, in that instance, my husband went to Syria. We had a very, very stressful situation with him there. And then I just moved on to the next thing, life, work, all of this. And I thought, okay. So then it was later that year, on Christmas Day, actually, we had gone to Thailand for Christmas, and we had this positive pregnancy test on Christmas Day, which was so amazing. But then I started immediately panicking.
Right.
Immediate. Couldn't even really enjoy the moment because you're thinking, well, what's going to happen?
Exactly. Is it going to last?
Is it going to last?
Yeah.
What should I do? Should I, and you're just like going through all of this sort of like real panic state. At least I did, and I'm like, I don't even want to get on the plane because that's going to be stressful, and like just all of this stuff was going through my head. And I realized like, I'm not even enjoying this moment. And and that really carried on through that pregnancy. We kept that pregnancy, thankfully. But every time I went to the doctor, I would have this fear.
Yeah.
Is something going to be wrong? Are we going to lose the baby? Will there be a heartbeat? And I really talk about this in my book because I think it resonates with a lot of women. This fear that just carries on with you, even when you are ostensibly having a healthy pregnancy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and how can it not?
Right.
Yeah.
One, you've had that support with you, maybe if you're lucky, but you still probably haven't processed it all. So you're still carrying that fear and previous grief with you. So I was thankful to have then a pretty healthy, well, I should say I had a TIA at 16 weeks. So I guess there were things there that were not, I almost forgot about that. So I ended up in the hospital in Beirut overnight. And because of the security situation there at the time, like my husband couldn't stay with me. Like I had bodyguards and was just like in the hospital by myself, bodyguards at the door, bodyguards downstairs, by myself.
Yeah.
And having to kind of go through this situation. Thankfully, I was okay and our daughter was okay, but it was scary. They just needed to adjust my blood thinning medication. So then, the pregnancy progressed and I had to leave Lebanon because I wasn't able to give birth there, but my husband was not able to go home with me at that point because he had to finish his tour in Lebanon.
Oh my gosh.
So in that was May, I left and moved to Seattle. And I moved in with my best friend, which was so fun in so many ways, but I was missing my husband for sure. And I never had my own house. Like with either of my pregnancies, I was like, I've never had a place that's mine to come home to. Now, my best friend would say, well, my house is your house. And that is so true. And she is taking care of me in so many ways. But still, it's like not having this place that's yours to go home to, right?
Yeah.
So I stayed with her. My husband was able to come back at the end of his tour. And then we were induced because of the latent factor 5. They really wanted to watch how my delivery went. They were concerned with that. And it went well. And then, I had her in the evening and the next day they're like, okay, bye.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm
like 24, was it even 24 hours?
No, like it was the next afternoon.
Oh my gosh.
And they're like, you're doing well. Baby is latching-ish. No. We were having like serious breastfeeding issues, which is something nobody prepared me for. I'll just be honest. Like that was just not talked about in any way. And then like, oh, it's going to be the most perfect thing you've ever done. And it's so easy. And now after so many years of talking to countless friends, colleagues, clients, that is not the case for many, many people. So, I just was like, okay, well, here we go. We have done such a poor job as a society of preparing people for the fourth trimester.
Yes.
Because you're like, okay, I've done the hard work now. I created and birthed this human, and now we're going to go off into the world and we're going to keep them alive.
Yeah.
And everything is going to be great.
What you think is the hard part. You think that's the hardest part.
Right. And then seriously, the next day you're like, oh my goodness, what do I do?
Yeah.
And I was lucky to go back to my best friend's house. So there were my best friend Carolyn and her husband and my husband, 3 adults there besides me, helping me to take care of the baby. So I was very, very grateful to have that support there. Still not my own home, living in a guest room with just my suitcases and whatever. But then my husband had to leave at 4 days after our daughter was born. He was due in Washington, D.C. for language training. So then he goes off, and here I am. And I cannot even tell you how appreciative I am of my friends there, because literally my daughter was not latching on. She was it was awful. She wasn't getting enough food. I wasn't getting any sleep. I was freaking out, panicking, I'm not even a good mom. All these things that start going through your head. I'm failing at this, and it just started. Oh goodness, I can't even feed my baby. What worth do I have?
Right.
Right. And I think these are pretty common themes for a lot of people.
The words that you just said have been echoed so many times with so many guests that I've talked to. And it's so unfortunate. I was I can't even feed my baby. Yes.
And then I'm making sort of panic calls to a lactation consultant. I didn't even leave her my name or my number. I just am crying, leaving messages. And then thankfully she came over that day once my husband, this was right before my husband left. And he was like, I think I will call her and talk to her.
Let me field this one.
Yeah. And so, she was helpful and to some extent, as much as she could be. But really the bottom line was, we never got the breastfeeding down. I continued to feel like a failure. And then I was I have to pump. I was pumping around the clock. So then my best friend would come in to feed her while I pumped. Thank goodness for that, because I would have never slept and would have been even more of a disaster than I already was. And there's this whole thing of formula is bad. So then you have to get past that too, and my doctor was thankfully no, you need to feed your baby. And this is the way that's going to happen. And there's no shame in that.
No.
And I really, really struggled with that, in those early weeks of who am I? Goodness, I'm failing. We're just set up for that though, too, to have those ideas, as birthing people, that if it's not perfect, you failed at it.
Yeah. Or all of these things that I hate the saying, they should be natural.
Right.
They should come naturally to you.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case.
No. Come to find out, our daughter had a severe tongue tie, hence why she wasn't latching on. And by the time we had that fixed, it was too late in the game for us to really ever get that. So I ended up pumping around the clock for about six months to have my supply. And that when she was 3 weeks old, she and I moved to to Virginia to be with my husband, who was in the DC area at the time. So that was another thing. It's just okay, we've had this baby. 3 weeks in, I'm going to leave my best friend, my parents, my community of, family there, and my doctor, our pediatrician, everybody. And I'm just going to get on a plane and move to a new place that I don't know anybody.
And start all over again.
And start again. The good thing is my husband was doing language training at the time. And so he had a schedule in which he went to work early, did language school, and came home. So I had that support in the afternoon. But I'll tell you, it was just me and Kira.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't have a community at all. And it was such a shocking change, in an already very sort of fluid situation of moving multiple times when I was pregnant, not having my own space, and my husband having to leave early. That was a crazy time, and just being pushed into the world with this infant. I just really have such a hard time with how the U.S. sort of sees this fourth trimester. The lack of education and preparation around it for most people, unless you're, I don't know. I don't even know. It's been like a decade, so maybe it's a little bit better, but I tend to not think so.
It's really not. I think I also have like blinders on right now because perinatal mental health is like my area of focus. So I see it a little bit more, but no, from all of the guests that I've talked to, especially like brand new parents, they're like, I wasn't prepared for any of this.
No,
so
you're not. For the exhaustion, just the round the clockness of it. It's never ending. It's a job that you don't ever stop, And so I think we just could do such a better job in supporting moms and spouses and partners, whoever is, the caretakers for the baby.
Yeah.
To take care of the caretakers.
Yes. Yes. I hate repeating myself, but I've said this so many times. We have this age-old saying, like, it takes a village to raise a baby. It takes a village to raise a mama.
Yeah, it definitely does. And most people don't even have a village for either one of those things.
No.
Because we have lost the sense of community. We live in a very much, at least in the US, in a insular sort of fashion. And we don't want to ask for help either. I'm as guilty of that as the next person. And it's something I've really worked on, but you don't want to seem weak or that you're failing or that someone else is going to assume that you're not good at this job of parenting.
Yeah.
And then you don't ask for help. It's often not even there.
No, even if you, and where do you look? Especially if you're someone who, like you were at the time, like you were away from your family. Your family wasn't right there. Who do you ask?
Yeah, there was nobody really to ask, There's other countries I know that do such an amazing job of, bringing in that support for the mom after having the baby and the parents in general, and it's just such a terrible thing. We have the resources for this. We have the system that we could do such a better job, and we just don't. And I have lots to say about why I think that is, but that's not for today.
That's another podcast. Trust me, I've gone down that rabbit hole several times.
Yeah.
But.
So that was like the first pregnancy. And then we thought, oh, we're not going to have any more kids. We're one and done, as they say. It had just been a lot of that had been so traumatic to me, especially, ending up in the hospital and all of these things had really made us think maybe we're just going to have one child. And so our next post, when our daughter was 10 months old, we moved to Cambodia. So we've moved across the world, and there I was able to actually, because the cost of living is much less there and just how it is, I was like, oh, I can hire somebody to help me. And it was like such a game changer to just have this person who can help me with all of the things. I started being able to take care of myself, which was huge for my mental health, which I wouldn't say I had postpartum depression, but it was a struggle.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are quick to be like, well, I didn't have PPD, or I didn't have PPA, or I didn't have, it's like, it's okay if you struggled. You don't have to have a label on it to say like, that was hard.
Yeah. It was really hard.
Yeah.
It was really, really hard. And then I moved, to Cambodia, and I was able to have this like sort of support system there every day. And a few months later, we decided, okay, we're going to try again. We know what's going on. We have this plan in place. So we spoke with our doctor at the embassy, and we said, this is my medical situation, and can we get these blood thinners on the market? No. Okay, well, let's order them just in case that I do get pregnant. And we sort of started putting the pieces in place in case we were able to get pregnant. And I'm so thankful to say that we were able to. It took about 8 months, so it wasn't like, oh, super fast, but we were, able to get pregnant. I still had those thoughts of, okay, well, now I'm not even getting pregnant quickly. What's going on? And then again, when I was pregnant, it's like, oh, I could not ever shake that fear.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was writing my book that I was like, man, I never really enjoyed these.
I know. I was going to say, you never got to sort of live in those moments.
Yeah, because I was always afraid.
Yeah.
Like there was a point in Cambodia where I started spotting, and I must have been like 15 or 16 weeks along. And I was just like, oh no, here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go. Everything was okay. But again, it was that sort of fear factor. And then a doctor had told us that she wasn't growing properly. So that, I hopped on this plane and went to Bangkok to see we decided to give birth in Bangkok. I should caveat that, because with my blood clotting disorder, flying all the way back to the US just didn't make sense.
Right.
30 plus hours of travel. And, it just didn't really seem like we were putting my health in like the best situation there. And the healthcare in Bangkok is phenomenal. So we had many friends actually that were pregnant at the time, and a lot of them had given birth in Bangkok. So we went and we checked it out. And we thought, okay, yeah, we can do this. I had a high risk OB there, and the whole thing was so different. They were like, oh, you can do these things, and you're going to stay in the hospital for this amount of time, and we can have you in the natural birth room. And there were just all of these things that they talked about right off the bat that had never been discussed in my, US birth. In there, it was like, you're going to lay in bed and you're going to push and you're going to give birth. And then in Bangkok, I had found this midwife, and I was like, she's like, no, we can do this, in this other way, a natural, again, to use that word, but, without an epidural, which was what I was, hoping to do. And so it was just already this very different sort of experience. So then I had this other woman who was part of the community. There was a really large expat community in Bangkok also. So it made it easy to sort of find these people to be part of my community.
Yeah.
And they had postpartum support.
And I was dedicated
postpartum support.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what magic is this?
Like, excuse me, what now?
Yes. So when, we moved there a couple months before I was due to give birth, because I was high risk. They wanted me to just be there. And, my mom was able to be there, my mother-in-law. And so I was far, far from home, but I was able to really create this community. And even with expats and local ties, it was lovely. So I go to the hospital when we're in labor, and they have me in the natural birth room. I had to end up going to a regular birthing room because we were having some issues with the fetal heart rate. Then I'm in there. I'm able to walk around. They're really dedicated to like, how are you going to give birth in a way that works for you?
Oh my gosh.
I literally had her on my hands and knees pushing, because that's where I was at in that moment.
Yeah.
And my midwife was like, we've got this. And I was like, wow, so I was able to just have a different hospital situation for sure. This was January, and I'd gone in the evening, but she was born in the early morning. 4 days later.
Oh my god.
They're like, would you like to go home now?
Oh, they asked you.
And I was like, yeah, I have a toddler. I think the Seahawks were playing the next day, and I was like, I want to watch the Super Bowl.
I love that.
And I'm like, but they would have allowed me to continue to stay. And as soon as Kate was born, they said, well, we have the nursery and we'll take her for you. And I was like, oh no, I don't, I ended up having her in the room with me. I don't know. It was just to say, I was like, I really want her to be with me. But they came all the time and took her.
Yeah.
And just took care of her.
Oh my gosh.
And then I was getting massages. I just couldn't. And so I'm thinking, well, why can't we have this in the United States?
Yeah, no, yes. I don't. I don't know why I even said it like that. Like the what? Because like I said, we did this series and I learned these things, like these practices of massage and like massage even for like your uterus to like help. Yes. And like, I don't know if they did this where you were at, but like teaching baby massage too, to help with like colic and things like that. Like what?
Right. And I was having a hard time again with the latching on, and I had hired, I think she was an American living there, but she was a lactation consultant, and she was there with me all the time, helping, and again, teaching the massage. And my midwife would come over once I went home, and the midwife came every day to the hospital too to check on me. And then when I went home, she had like 2 weeks of postpartum support as part of her plan.
Yeah.
But also in the Thai culture, mom doesn't do anything for like 30 days.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not expected to do anything. You just stay in bed.
Yeah. Which I'm like, I don't know if I want to stay in bed, but like, I love this idea of like, you are being so taken care of.
Yes.
And so I had that in some aspect because my family had flown out. So I had help there. And then I had my midwife checking on me. I had the lactation consultant. And it was just this very, I would say just the entire thing, while my US one wasn't terrible, there's no birth trauma or anything. It was just such a different experience, and thinking, wow, we could do this. Besides, the cost is like a fraction of anything that you would have in the United States. But there's also another podcast.
Yeah. Yes.
I remember seeing the bill for my daughter in Seattle versus the one that we were having in Bangkok. I was like, oh goodness, like, how is this even possible?
Yeah.
So it was just really a whole different experience. And I was lucky in that the cost of living is less. You can have a nanny. So I was very blessed to be able to do those things. But also it just should be part of our society to have support that people can access. Because definitely there's support out there if you have the financial means to do so, but we should have it be accessible to people.
To everyone. Yeah. And the thing that strikes me so much about the differences in your two birth stories is the first is so very clinical and so very just like almost like assembly line process. Like, okay, now you're here. Now you're going to push. Now you had the baby. Now you go home.
Yeah.
And then your experience in Bangkok was just so much more holistic, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that in doing the research that I've done on other cultures, it shouldn't surprise me as much as it still does. These other cultures are so embracing of the birthing person because you're not just bringing a life into the world, you are also experiencing a new birth of yourself.
Right? Of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an absolute reinvention of you for the first, second, third, fourth, however many times.
Yeah.
Right. But each time it's a different version of you. I was so that the Thai really do focus heavily on C-sections.
Oh.
So that was something I had to really advocate for myself. And part of the reason why I found a midwife was to make it so that they're not like, you're going to have a C-section on this date. Nothing wrong with having C-sections.
Yeah.
But they have C-sections for like auspicious holidays, for lucky births.
Okay.
Right. So I just was like, okay, we're going to, I wanted to have that more holistic approach if possible.
Yeah.
But really just the whole way they did it was a holistic approach.
Yeah. It sounds like it. It sounds vastly different.
Yeah. Vastly different.
How did that impact your fourth trimester the second time around? Did you still have a lot of those same fears and doubts?
I would say no. I still was like really struggling with the breastfeeding part, though we were able to get that down, and then she never took a bottle. So that didn't impact my fourth trimester.
Course. Yeah.
And I loved those moments. I was so happy to have that. But also then it was just the mommy show all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I would say, no, I was less stressed, less fearful, less just upset, maybe is a good way to put it, because I had people there to support me. And when I went back to Cambodia, I had, help that was coming to the house every day.
Yeah.
It just helps tremendously,
Right.
And so I just wish that everybody could have that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just looking at my notes, but one of the top things it says is support system. And yeah, the importance of having the community and having a support system and how it affects your journey into motherhood. Like you said, for the first time, second time, third time, no matter how many times you give birth, it's a different experience and you become a different person, and having a community there to support you makes all the difference in the world. And we don't have that here.
No, we don't. And I don't know, frankly, what I would have done if I was in the US at that time, because I didn't know it at the time, but I had Lyme disease. I'd been bitten partway through my pregnancy.
Yes, you had mentioned that.
Yeah. And so after the birth of Kate, I thought, well, I'm not getting better. Like, I thought I should be bouncing back a little bit. Like, this doesn't seem like normal postpartum stuff. Recovery, like and so I thought, well, this is so weird. I'm obviously tired. Every birthing person is tired.
Yeah.
But it was this bone deep fatigue. And then I was like sort of having some mental health issues around that because I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I had all of the support, which I don't know where I would have been if I did not have that support, because I was like barely hanging on with my energy.
Right.
And so I ended up leaving Cambodia a little bit early, just a couple months early, with the two girls. So I left, here we go, with a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old.
Just you?
My husband flew me back.
Okay.
But then he had to go back.
Oh,
so
boy.
He did fly us back.
Okay.
And then again, I moved in with my best friend, who has always been there. But it was again, this transient thing, because I was like, I have to figure out what's going on with myself.
Yeah.
Like, really, because this is not okay. And it was there that I found a Lyme literate doctor in the Seattle area who tested me, and I was positive for that and positive for reactivated EBV, which is mono. And once you have these viruses, they stay with you and they can be reactivated. And EBV is often reactivated in stressful situations, including pregnancy, because that's putting a huge stress burden and immune burden on your body.
Yeah.
So I had all of these things happening sort of at the same time. And so this is, into that 4th trimester, and here I am, the kids, husband finally is able to join us, and we moved to Dallas.
You moved again.
Where I didn't know anybody.
Of course. And you've just got these diagnoses.
I just had the diagnoses. I didn't know anybody. And overseas, because we work at, embassies and consulates, there's sort of a built-in community in some aspects. But whenever you go back to the US, you're just like on your own again.
Yeah.
And so, which is how I know many people are when they move, it's starting over. So again, starting over with these new diagnoses. And that's really where I had the hardest time, was in that time frame, because I was so ill and I had a baby and a toddler and I didn't have any support.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're back in the US healthcare system.
Back in the US healthcare system. Thankfully, I became good friends with our neighbor, but in those early weeks, like I didn't have anybody. My husband had to travel. And so it's like literally we closed on our house. He left the next day and I'm living on like a floor with a mattress with a baby and a toddler.
That does not sound like a good time.
No, it wasn't a good time. It was really, really hard. And I think that was where my mental health was really having the hardest time, was in those early Dallas days. I really struggled not having people there. And in fact, it was bad enough that my husband called and had his mom come stay with me.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, what sort of got you through that time? What were you able to, or were you able to really access anything?
I didn't really access anything except for like trying to find help for my Lyme disease, which I'd never really got in Texas. And so it was like working, telehealth with my doctor in Seattle, and then becoming friends with my neighbor helped tremendously. And then my mom and my mother-in-law came repeatedly because my husband traveled for 4 months. He was gone at one point. And so I was just there.
Yeah.
It was a hard time.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly can't imagine not just navigating having a toddler and an infant in a place where you don't know anybody, but then on top of that, navigating a Lyme diagnosis and not getting the help that you need. I mean, thank goodness for your mother and your mother-in-law.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not often that I'm left speechless. I usually can think of something to say, but that's just, it must have been incredibly isolating.
It was very isolating. And there was one point, my knees had swollen up so tremendously from the Lyme disease. Like it goes into my joints. It's like really where I had the worst problems. And it took me like 5 minutes to walk down the hallway from my room to Kate's room. And I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing right now. Like, I cannot keep going on like this. And that next morning I had barely met my neighbor, maybe a couple of times. And I was like, can you take me to the doctor? Like, I can't drive.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of our friendship. I was like, please help me.
Yeah, but like, good for you for advocating for yourself. That must have been scary. I mean, I'm an antisocial person, just to be like, I need help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really, because there was no other option. Like, I was not in a good space. I was responsible for two little humans.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a clear path forward.
So how long did you stay in Dallas?
We were there like 20 months.
Okay. And you didn't, and in that time, there was no real progress with your Lyme.
There were some, I made some progress, but it was also the hardest healing moment. So It was all like compounded together: new motherhood, toddlerhood, and sickness, and not having like people around me. Thankfully, I did have my small neighbor community. And so we were making some progress with Lyme, but for every step forward, I was taking 10 steps back, which is the thing with healing. It's not linear. It's very tricky.
Right.
And it was just so hard. I ended up having to have like a tooth extracted because of it. I had all of these things just really all happened at the same time. And I think that was where I struggled the most. And we moved to Nigeria from there. And actually, that might be where the struggle continued. My mental health was really deteriorating at that point. And I didn't know how. I remember calling my mom and being like, I don't know if I can stay here. And I've been all over and I've done really hard things. And I don't know that I can do this.
Yeah.
I was very isolated there in the beginning, just given where we were living, and I didn't have any friends, and I couldn't drive, and I didn't have any transportation. And every time I went to the grocery store, like half the time I get home and everything was like rotten. It was just like, and the kids were going crazy. The 2 and 4, almost 5-year-old at that point, it was just like, nobody told me that it was going to be like this.
I've got the line from the sign. So no one told you life was going to be this way.
No.
But yeah, I mean, that's parenthood in a nutshell, is no one prepares you for it.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this so much with you, but like, your circumstances compound those. Everybody has challenges and everybody's circumstances are different.
Absolutely.
But like, I personally cannot imagine moving around as much, moving around, navigating different healthcare systems every time you're somewhere new, having a toddler and a baby, and then a toddler and a small child in a foreign country. Like, of course your mental health was impacted.
Yeah.
What were you doing anything to sort of tackle that? Like, I don't know what the options would have been. You were in Nigeria at that
Nigeria.
point?
So we're living in Lagos, Nigeria, a city of 24-ish million people.
Yeah.
And it was funny because you're with so many people and you can still be so isolated.
Yeah.
And it was just this whole, I ended up really loving our time in Nigeria, but this entry point to it was really the hardest landing I have ever had anywhere that we've lived. So we ended up moving because there were some situations with our living situation at the house. And so we moved to this other housing compound. And that's where everything sort of shifted for me, because there were lots of families with young children and mom friends. And, I still had to put myself out there, but because we were on this compound with a pool and you can't, like, there wasn't really like a lot of things to go do, like parks and other things there. So we all congregated at this pool. And so it was there that sort of mindset shift started happening. I just needed to find some people and,
you needed to talk to somebody.
I needed to talk to somebody. We hired an amazing helper, Gladys. I really think that she's a lot of the reason why I was able to manage there and to actually start getting better. She helped me with the kids every day. My oldest was in kindergarten, I believe. And so, things started falling into a routine, but those like first month and a half, I was just like, oh goodness, and then it was really finding those people. And I was talking to someone else on a podcast the other day, and I was like, not a lot of people knew that I was as sick as I was, because
I was wondering.
I'm very private, yet I've just written this book that really is my whole life and all the intimate details of it of the last 15 years. So clearly not private anymore.
Not anymore.
But I didn't want to be that person, because when you're sick with an invisible illness, people don't always get it.
Yeah.
Not because they don't want to, they just don't understand it. And so I just kind of kept that to myself until I made closer friends. But, people are like, well, why don't you want to come to this? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Well, I don't have the energy to do any of these things, And then I started getting massage because I found a massage lady. So that was that's one of those things that really, really helps me both mentally and physically. And so that became, a priority for me. I found a yoga class, again, mental and physical help there. And then partway through our tour, I was not doing very well with my Lyme. It had really taken a hard turn. And so I flew to Seattle, and I met a new doctor, and he really helped me change my mindset. Like, he heard me, he saw me, he validated like what I was going through. You know, I wasn't just another patient. And it was working with him that I was like, oh, I can get better.
Yeah. You know,
You
I
know?
didn't even know. I think there's still, just like there's so little information about pregnancy and postpartum, there's so little information about Lyme.
Yeah.
I had no idea that, like, I had only ever heard, like, you have Lyme for your whole life. That's what
Yep.
I've heard. Like, you have Lyme and you'll have it for your whole life. And that's it, the end. And I'm only now learning, like, you can go into remission and you can, like,
which is what I've done.
yeah. So I'm so glad that you found a doctor that saw you and got you.
Yeah, it was a huge turning point in my healing journey because, like, you really need to have that healing mindset. I think you need to have a healing mindset if you have complex chronic illness, healing mindset postpartum.
Yeah.
You know, all of these things it's very important to have this healing mindset. And it was then that I started to have that. But then I changed my whole career and became a health coach and all of that kind of stuff to help people with Lyme disease. But yeah,
Isn't that how that works?
It is, you know, we go through these things and we change who we are and what we're doing. But yeah, the Lyme was really impacting every aspect of my health, including my mental health, because I just had such severe brain fog. I could hardly remember any words.
Yeah.
My memory was shot. Everything was, you know,
terrible. I mean, you want to talk about mom brain, put Lyme brain fog on top of that. And that's a recipe for disaster.
My husband would be like, I'm like talking to him and then I'm like, I have no idea what I was going to say.
Yeah. I mean, I have that on the daily, but not to that. Like, I can't even imagine. Yeah. I'll be mid-sentence and I'll be like, nope.
Yeah.
It's gone.
I still do that. And I think it's because as moms, we have so many things going on in our head. Like,
it's all the tabs open. Yes.
Which I have all the tabs open.
All the tabs open, and one of them's playing music, but I don't know which one, and I can't close out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And you only have so much space in your brain, right? And we're just doing all of the things, and then you add any other stuff on top of that, and it's, you know, it's just compounded.
So many things, so many themes that you've brought up through this episode are things that I think are important. One being community. And I think it's awesome that listeners are going to get a good perspective on your perception of community in your experiences birthing in the U.S. compared to birthing outside of the U.S. And we all know that community is important, but knowing that it exists elsewhere brings more attention to the fact that it doesn't exist here and that it needs to. Yeah. That's one theme. Another theme is bounce back culture. Yes. That is pushed on us, especially in childbirth, but even for like chronic illness too.
Absolutely.
And invisible illness. And it's just this, and you used the words bounce back more than once. And I was like, yep, there it is. We are expected to pick up and get on with our lives.
Yep.
And that's just not, that's not a thing. It's not a thing. It's a thing that has been created and pushed on us. And it's not healthy. It drives me insane.
Couldn't agree more, because it is a driver of stress, of illness.
Yes.
And we know what happens when you have chronic stress, right? And so we all have stress. You can't get rid of stress.
No, of course not.
But we don't need to be creating a culture that is expected to just move on to the next thing and not actually deal with what is happening to us in that moment.
Yeah.
Because we cannot heal if we're not dealing with it.
No. And like you said, healing isn't linear.
No.
And it's not I don't want to say it's not a steady process, but like it looks different for everyone.
Absolutely.
So expecting everyone to have the same outcome and take the same steps is just not productive in any way, shape, or form.
No. And we have like good, like critical care, like definitely.
Yes.
But that is not healthcare like holistically speaking, right?
No.
Like we need those things for sure.
Yes.
But you cannot expect people's birth, illness, any of these things to follow that same path.
Right.
There is no one size fits all.
No. No. And I'm getting into it, but I don't like to subscribe to gender norms. I feel gender is a construct, whatever. That's how I feel. But in the same breath, I can say that cisgendered females, I feel like, are the most heavily pressured in terms of get on with your life.
Absolutely.
And we are so often, I identify as non-binary, but I'm female presenting. Women are dismissed in their mental health concerns, in their physical health concerns. And so much of that lies within the perinatal and postpartum and beyond, into menopause and in puberty.
Everything.
Like, yes. The whole experience, like, oh, well, you're just going to get your period. Or you just like, you go to the doctor and you're like, no, I really, something's wrong. And you're dismissed like it's hormones. And I'm going down the rabbit hole.
And if it is my hormones, then how are you going to help me get to the root cause of why that's happening? Exactly. Like Band-Aid medicine is not how people get better.
No.
I 100% agree with everything that you're saying on that point, because I literally did not deal with any of these things until 2020. The girls and I left Nigeria, got on a medevac plane out of there. And because we just weren't sure how things were going, go to Seattle, where I think, okay, I'm going to go into this quarantine house with my kids for a couple of weeks and then go and stay with my mom and stepdad. Ostensibly the safest I've ever been in my life, in like this recent time of my life in the last 15 years, I had a complete breakdown. And I mean, like the kind in which you're having extreme dreams and nightmares. And it was the craziest thing, because I knew I was safe. And yet all of it came out in that moment. Yeah.
I wonder too, how much of that was suppressed from your whole journey, from this whole journey.
Oh, it was 100%. 100%.
And it just, because of the circumstances, we were all literally and physically isolated, that you just had to confront it in that. Like it was just there.
Right. It was just there, and there was nothing I could do about it. My mom was down the road, but we weren't supposed to be together.
Yeah.
And I couldn't stop it. There was no one there to just be able to help me. And like 3 days into it, my mom would come in at the house at night and just like sleep in the guest room, because I was calling her panicking in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I'm responsible for these 2 kids and I'm falling apart.
But you did come out the other side. You came out the other side.
I did. There was my doctor. He was like, I really think that you have PTSD from suppressing all of the things that have gone on in your life, because there's so many more things that aren't related to birth and postpartum that have happened. And he had me work with an energy healer that he knows. He's like, I really recommend that you work with Jennifer, this 5 elements energy healer. She changed my life.
Yeah.
Because we did that work on healing from all of these things, bringing them up, very hard things to like relive. And, I came out on the other side, and then I ended up writing this book, which was actually the most healing thing I could have ever done for myself.
Talk to me about that. I want to hear about your book.
So I wrote Passports and Parasites. I wasn't planning on writing a book, but about a year and 3 months ago, my husband was like, Vashti, you need to tell your story. Yeah. And I was like, I don't, if you see my Instagram, it's like all like medical health stuff, educational. I'm not like out there like, oh, this is what I'm doing every day. He's like, no, seriously, you have a very special story. Okay. So I kind of sat on it. And then New Year's Day last year, I started writing it. And I was like, okay, we're moving again, because then we were living in the Caribbean. And I was like, I got to get this book done before we move back to the United States in the summer. Otherwise, it's just going to, I know myself, it would just fall off the rails. Right. Mm-hmm. So I finished it by Mother's Day weekend, the rough draft. And it highlights, it's really the last 15 years of my life. So it starts with me on a helicopter going into Baghdad and thinking, what did I sign up for? It chronicles every sort of detail of what I've shared with you today, and also more of the parenting, the infertility, really scary situations health-wise with my family overseas, most of this happening far away. And then, it really ends in the present, and I've come through on the other side. And I really hope that it shines light on the fact that there is hope, that people are not alone, that you can make it through. But writing these things again, specifically like to our conversation today, having to write and then rewrite and rewrite again these situations was terribly hard and yet so therapeutic.
I can imagine, because you're having to relive them over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was a lot. And I saw my energy healer many times.
Yeah.
Because I had to clear that out, but it was so therapeutic. So the book, I guess, is like this thing I never thought I was going to do, but maybe was, outside of having kids, the greatest thing I've done, and it's getting really great reviews, and it's touching people in ways that I didn't foresee, which I think is really all you can ask for as an author, as a person in general, and trying to make the world a better place is, helping others sometimes through your own story.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's, I'm so thankful that you chose to share part of your story on this podcast, because that's our goal is one, through sharing our stories, we're normalizing the conversations.
Absolutely.
Making it okay to talk about these things. But two, I say that every time I connect with a guest, I feel like a tiny part of myself is healed a little bit.
Yeah.
And my story is different than your story. And your story is different than the person that I talked to this morning. And all of our situations are completely different.
Yep.
But we've all been through something, and we can relate on that level. Mm-hmm. And to know, especially like you're saying, there's another side, and you will find the other side. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is what's most important in what we do. And you writing your book and with us sharing our stories.
Yeah. And we're creating a community.
Yes.
Through our stories, normalizing this, providing that hope and inspiration to others who may be in the thick of it. Yeah. And who might need to hear this, my story, anybody's story.
Yeah.
Today, you know? And so there's real power in that. And in normalizing this discussion, the discussion of birth, infertility, loss, grief, things that we are really told to just get on with.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is okay. I'm telling you right now, this is me on my soapbox. Listeners, if you haven't caught on at this point, it's okay. It's okay to talk about these things. Mm-hmm. And it's okay that you experience, it's not okay that things happen to you. Like, you can be mad, you can be angry, you can be really, really upset, and know that you're not alone, and that things will get better.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always end on a question, and I usually take the whole episode to decide which question I'm going to ask. I think the question that I'm going to ask you've touched on several times throughout the episode, but if we can narrow it down,
sure.
What is the one thing you hope my listeners take away from your story?
Hope.
I love that. I love that because I think that's the theme of the day. Take hope away from Vashti's story.
Yeah.
Yeah. I, again, just want to thank you so much. You have led an incredible life so far. I am adding your book to my must-read list. It's getting quite long, but I am definitely putting it on there. And I can't wait to see what the future holds for you. I'll be checking in.
Thanks, Chelsea. Thank you so much for having me on and for really having these important conversations. You're helping a lot of people.
Thank you, Vashti, for sharing your story. Your contrasting experiences in the healthcare system, both in the U.S. and abroad, highlight the need for a reevaluation of how we care for birthing people. Your constant resiliency, despite the hardships you've faced, speaks volumes. Listeners, please check out Vashti's book, Passports and Parasites, An Extraordinary Journey of Adventure, Resilience, and Healing, which you can find linked in our show notes or on Amazon. You can keep up with us on Quiet Connection by following us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at Quiet Connection Podcast. You can help our community grow by leaving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and consider sharing our episodes on social media. To share your personal journey, you can contact us through our website at www.quietconnectionpodcast.com or by email at quietconnectionppmh@gmail.com. Join us next time when another story is told and you realize you are not alone. I see you.